Hey, it's MykonosFan. I figured in lieu of the monthly Q&A videos the Patreon goal had reached, monthly discussion videos might be a more worthwhile thing for people supporting the channel and people staying tuned into the channel. So let me know how this works for you all, and we'll go from there. And usually these will probably be scripted, but I wanted to go unscripted with this one. So, as you know by the title of this video, what I'm going to be talking about today are Spyro HD remakes, specifically the case for and against them. Now, right up front, I want to clarify, I know a title like that probably immediately conjures some kind of negative feelings, like, oh, here's going to be some asshole who hates Spyro and is going to say, like, oh, platformers don't work today, or something like that. And like, no, like, I like Spyro a lot, you know. I have a Let's Play of Spyro 2 going up on a different channel at Find the Computer Room, and when I started doing this review series I do on this channel, Spyro was the first game I went to, right? I like Spyro a lot, and there will be an ultimate kind of message to this video at the end. My last kind of thing where it doesn't make the remakes impossible, but maybe... let's look at it this way. There's going to be a case, I think, for Spyro remakes at present, and things that make it an iffy business proposition for Activision. Let's put it that way. Yeah, that works better. Okay. So, like, you know, obviously, like, once Crash got the Insane Trilogy announced, you know, human nature, everyone was like, what about Spyro, right? Because Crash and Spyro are owned by Activision, and, aside from Crash getting the Skylanders at the same time as the Insane Trilogy was announced, there wasn't too much going on with Crash. I think, you know, around '08 was the last... I don't remember if Crash of the Mutants or Mind Over Mutants, I forget the exact titles. I forget which one of those was the last one, but there was a last one. And then I think there were some kart racing games on iOS platforms that actually sold very well, at least for the time. So that was about kind of the last thing, and then we got word of a lot of projects that were canceled and that didn't work out, and there was just kind of a lull, right? So immediately once Crash was announced, everyone, you know, a lot of people who love Spyro thought, what about Spyro, right? So I want to start with the things that kind of maybe lead to this being a more likely thing. I wouldn't say there's... Now, first off, like, there's no hard evidence, right? There's no one let anything slip. There's been, like, no trademarks filed or anything like that to kind of tip us off. I think the best we can do at this point in time right now is just speculate on basically how Crash is doing and just kind of other things. And the first thing I wanted to touch on, this actually happened earlier this week or last week. First Four Figures, they make those incredibly overpriced, expensive statues that are like a foot tall of characters. They announced they're working with Activision, and they'll be making Crash Bandicoot statues, which makes sense. Crash is kind of... Activision's handling this Crash marketing pretty well, actually, I think. I feel like every other week they're showing off like how the levels are or how they compare to the original level, like side by side. I think they're kind of, you know, keeping people interested in what's going on with that game. They're listening to feedback, very obviously. If you've seen the Game Explain discussion I was in, I think all three of us had a concern about the game being kind of washed out. Vicarious Visions listened. There's some textures updated. There's a lot more color and things. Some have said maybe a little oversaturated now, but I think the difference is night and day personally, and it looked like simple touches, so I'm really glad they did that. But I kind of got off topic, but like, those are looking great. Activision's clearly recognizing that there is a hardcore Crash audience, because First Four Figure statues, those are only made for like the hardcore, the people who will look at a statue of Sonic going down the Sonic Adventure 2 Cityscape stage, you know, and look at that couple $100 or more asking price and say, yeah, okay, sure. And granted, maybe Sonic's a bad example, because I think Sega's maybe interested in pulling that license from what First Four Figures are saying, but you get the idea, right? The general point here. So they're making Crash Bandicoot statues, and this is the interesting tidbit, and this is kind of the most, this is like the most grounded thing you can look at and go, huh, maybe they're thinking about Spyro remakes. The specific wording was classic Spyro statues, and I believe someone who works at First Four Figures, showed off they were making kind of a example render model on a computer that I assumed they would base the statue off of, and it was the Spyro 1 box art pose, at least from the American pose. And it's really interesting to note the classic Spyro usage, because for a long time there has only been Skylander Spyro, and a lot of fans' thinking was if they wanted to, say, use two Spyro brands, a Skylanders and quote classic Spyro brand, that would be potentially confusing to kids, and like it would dilute the brand and stuff like that. Even though as time went on, Spyro became more of a background character in Skylanders. But thinking about it now, he's the main character in the Netflix show, which I think is getting a couple more seasons, possibly. So there was some confusion about that. I think personally, Activision looked at everything going on with Crash and said, oh, wait, right, okay, I guess there's actually an audience for this stuff, like the original incarnations and expressions of these characters, you know. And I think maybe they looked at how Sega's handling Sonic recently, right? For a long time, there was a worry that, like, splitting Sonic into, quote, classic and, quote, modern things would be confusing and stuff. You know, then the Boom sub-brand was introduced post-Generations, and then in July 2016 last year, we got the announcement of Sonic Mania and Sonic Forces, and it's like, oh, you know, classic Sonic and modern Sonic are both getting entries in presumably separate sub-series of the Sonic the Hedgehog brand, right? And no one's really confused, at least on like the surface level ideas of those games, right? There are things about the games themselves that are confusing people tuned in, but I think the average consumer can look at Sonic Mania and say, oh, okay, so that's like the old ones, and look at Sonic Forces and say, okay, that's a 3D new one, like the graphics are 3D, you know. I don't think it's as confusing as people think, and I think you can get away with that with Spyro, and I think Activision are realizing that with Spyro. You can have Skylander Spyro, but you can also just have Spyro the Dragon, right? It kind of, if we need another example, Rare in the 90s had a weird, slight, like, let's put it this way, Marvel Cinematic Universe with their games, right? Because, like, Conker might show up in Diddy Kong Racing, but then there'd be the Conker game, or Banjo might show up in that game, and then there'd be the Banjo games. And, like, that's not confusing. If anything, that's actually cooler for kids. Kids might play Skylanders to look at Spyro and say, well, I wonder what he's up to in that game. Or kids might play Spyro and look at Skylanders and say, well, who are all these other guys? I'm curious now, you know? I like Spyro. I think, if done well, you know, and as long as it's pretty clear, if you just look at like a cover art or something, they're separate, or if you look at the back of the box, it's clear they're separate. I think there's no confusion there, and I hope Activision are kind of dipping their toe in the water, and hopefully realizing, yeah, that's fine, you can get away with that, you know. So that they're specifically utilizing the classic Spyro terminology, which I think is a first, at least publicly. I think that is a good sign that Activision are willing to say, okay, we can make classic Spyro stuff. There can be a classic Spyro, quote, brand, and you'd think, the Crash Insane Trilogy is... people are very excited about that. It looks like it's being handled very well, and it's not hard to think, like, okay, what if we did that for this character too? What if we started utilizing this IP we have? Skylanders is dwindling down, but there's an insane... pun unintended, amount of interest in this Crash remakes we're doing. So, you know, maybe there's something here. And that was kind of my second note as a case for the Spyro remakes. The Insane Trilogy, there's a lot of interest in that. I wasn't expecting this level of interest, honestly. But I think Crash hits that perfect thing where a lot of hardcore gamers remember Crash. Like a lot of core in-tune gamers remember Crash, but a lot of casual people who maybe had a PlayStation when they were a kid have really fond memories of Crash. Crash was a big, you know, general audience success story. Like, back then, a lot of people liked Crash, hardcore gamer or not, you know? It was very simple to pick up and understand, and that resonated with people, and, like, the character designs and everything. People just fondly remember Crash, right? So, I think this remake is kind of striking gold in that it kind of hits both perspectives. It hits lapsed gamers who think like, oh man, Crash, yeah, okay, I miss Crash, you know? And it gets people who love video games who have been like, what happened to Crash? Oh, fuck, here's Naughty Dog era Crash, cool, you know? So I think there's something there. As for another idea of a case for, or at least like, maybe this is kind of what I hope would happen, right? So Spyro the Dragon released in 1998. Next year would be Spyro's 20th anniversary, and for this to be a 0.4, it has to assume Activision is actually already developing these remakes, right? But they kind of missed the trick with Crash, where the best they could do, I think, was to announce the Crash remakes in 2016 at E3, right? So they kind of missed the 20th anniversary, but maybe it'd be good to do that with Spyro, because then you can slap a 20th anniversary logo on there, which tells people, like, hey, it's original Spyro, it's not Skylander, you know, don't worry, like, this is a celebration, right? I think with Crash, they're marketing it well enough and, like, comparing it to the original games that's fine, but a 20th anniversary thing slapped on the box somewhere for Spyro could help a lot, I think, in ensuring that they've established that as a separate brand than the Skylander stuff, which has been pretty entrenched in the minds of at least gamers for a while, you know, and a lot of people are crazy about Spyro Skylanders, so I think that would help a lot. And my 4th.4, probably the somehow flimsier than the 20th anniversary thing. If it sounds like I'm riding on hope so far, that's kind of because that's all there is to go on, and the main purpose of this video is a point I want to make in the implausible section. But right now, collectathon platformers, you know, it's a good time to be a fan of those. They're kind of cropping up this year. 2017 is a great year for gaming in general, but for platforming fans, it's pretty exciting, you know? There have been a few games already, and I know by naming any I'm going to forget good examples, but like just real quick, you know, Ukulele is a very obvious example of like, here's something from the 90s that's a very lost ideology of game design. Boom, here it is today, right? And Ukulele reception has been kind of mixed, so, you know, don't take that as the grand example, but like then you look at things like Snake Pass, there's Mario Odyssey coming out this year, there's 2 Sonic games, and of course the Crash remake of the 3 games, and that audience is being catered to and fostered at the moment, and hopefully that is something that can continue. But I think there's something about Spyro that makes it kind of a good middle ground in terms of collectathon platformers. And what I mean by that is, I think it can appeal to a general enough audience that, you know, more casual game players would want to play it and see what it's about. Because at its core, you know, especially with the first title, Spyro is a very simple collectathon platformer. It doesn't ask too much of you. It's a little demanding in terms of being a 3D space with the controls and everything, but I think 20 years later, that's an easier sell for a general human being than in the early days of 3D gaming. And, you know, where, at least for Spyro 1's case, it just asks you to run around, collect gems, beat bad guys, and free dragons, you know, and maybe chase after some egg thieves, you know, and those guys are kind of notorious, so there's a bit of an allure there. There's a bit of history for people to get into. I think it hits that side of the spectrum well, in that it's a very good general audience game, you know, and by the time they've gone through Spyro 1, they're more used to it and can move into Spyro 2 and 3 if they so choose, right? In this hypothetical 3-game remake. And I think it also hits great for the core side of the gamers who remember Spyro fondly, who really love Insomniac's games and recognize that as not their starting point, but the game that put them on the map. And I think there's a lot of love for the original incarnations of Spyro. And I think really, if they played the cards right and made a good product like they seem to be doing with the Insane Trilogy, I think it'd be a smart move on Activision's behalf to capitalize on the nostalgia and re-establish the Spyro brand and move it forward like I'm hoping they do with Crash. So, the things that make it a harder sell for Activision, a company that wants to make money by making products that sell and don't cost a fortune to make, right? So, right off the bat, I'm just going to hit into a hard point here. Spyro, compared to Crash, the prospect of remaking 3 entire Spyro games is more daunting than remaking 3 entire Crash games. And to back that up, Crash games, not to put them down, a lot of the core gameplay is linear, hallways, you know, that look nice and play well, you know, great tight control and everything. But it's a lot less demanding to make those hallways. And, you know, there are times where Crash has 3D things going on and things that are more involved, like the Aquajet things and Crash 3 sections, or the biplane levels in Crash 3. And there's stuff like that where you gotta put your head down a bit more, I assume, if you're a developer, and put more play testing and focus into those. More assets are needed. Because like with Crash, what they seem to be doing with the Insane Trilogy is mimicking the Naughty Dog style of the camera isn't freely controllable in those hallways. So they can always estimate the farthest the camera will go and only design assets and build and put level geometry in to fit within that frame. They don't have to account for, say in Spyro, you know, a lot of the times we can fly off a ledge and then see like under a level, like it's a floating island. They have to account for stuff like that. That takes playtesting, more asset creation and stuff like that. It's more involved, right? And then you think about the mini games and side things that Spyro 2 and 3 introduced. There's stuff like boxing and sledding around on ice, doing hockey stuff, and all the flying around and everything. It's more involved, you know, and I'm not saying it's impossible, because like surely, you know, with enough time and money and manpower, this stuff can be done. I'm not saying it's like impossible. I'm just saying it's going to cost more money, which makes it a harder sell for Activision to sign off on, right? And you know, and frankly, there's just some stuff from the original games too that just don't hold up as well 2 decades later. Think of the seed spitting section of that one level in Spyro 2, right? Like, even playing that nowadays, you go a bit on it, you know. And just thinking about that exact thing in 3D, in 3D, in today's gaming landscape, I should have said. Pardon me. It's a bit tougher to sell. And then you hit the creative issue of, do we improve this and disappoint people who want an exact remake? Or do we make an exact remake and disappoint people who want to see some improvement and see this a little more modernized, right? Because I think there's a point of leniency, and I think after a while you distill the original enough that you may as well have just made a new entry, which I'd also actually be fine with, right? But we're just talking about the remakes here. So it's just a harder proposition. And to move into the next point of that kind of solidifies that a bit more, Spyro is just not as popular as Crash, you know? It's not a thing where they can put more money in and expect more money back, necessarily. Because Spyro didn't sell as well as Crash back in the day, you know? And, you know, you're basically putting more money into a product that less people might buy. And that's probably why Crash was very attracted to them. But for the third and final reason Crash was probably actually more attracted to them, if you think back before the Insane Trilogy announcement, even before there was like smoke everywhere that something was up with Crash, people spoke up and wanted Crash. Like, people would get annoyed at us Crash fans for being like, why aren't you doing something with Crash? Where's Crash? Why aren't you making new Crash games? Why don't you remake the old Crash games? Like, there was not a fever pitch fervor, but there was enough rumbling of people being like, man, you know, what's up with Crash? And I think they saw the demand there. They're like, there's people never shut up about Crash. What can we do about Crash, right? Then hints started dropping, you know. Uncharted 4 had the Crash section, which led a lot of speculation, like, did Sony buy back the license? What's up with Crash? What are they doing with Crash? Why don't they do something with Crash, right? And then there was the NECA toy guy being like, oh yeah, you know, we're making something for Crash, which led to things to like, what's up with Crash? What are they doing with Crash? There was like all this talk, right? Everything just kept fueling up Crash, Crash, Crash. And there was a point where people were like, nothing's going on with Crash, please shut up, you know? People who play games were like annoyed by it because Crash fans were so loud and they were making what they wanted known, right? And it all, I think, accumulated in those remakes being announced. Activision saw like, okay, there's a palpable, tangible audience here for Crash Bandicoot. So what is the safest, you know, cheapest thing we can do to test the waters? Remake the Naughty Dog games, right? And boom, here we are, you know, we're a little under a couple months away from that. On the opposite end of the spectrum, this, I'm not going to say Spyro fans don't talk, because obviously that would be factually incorrect, but you don't hear the same fervor. Now, once Crash got announced, people switched to Where's Spyro, but even then, you don't hear a lot of Spyro fans demanding it, you know? I think often their own separate circle, Spyro fans talk amongst themselves and be like, man, wouldn't it be cool? We need to do something. We need to make our voices heard. We need to resonate with other people and get them talking too. And I agree, they do. But it just hasn't happened yet. And I think maybe part of that is Skylanders made Spyro fans just go into apathy of like, you know, kind of relating back to earlier, why would they do something if they have the Skylanders brand? You know, nothing's going to happen. And I'm hoping that first four-figure statue hint is like the initial flicker of a match, and soon the fire will be lit. But as of right now, Spyro fans are very quiet. They're very I'm saying we are very complacent. You know, us Spyro fans, we're quiet. We just kind of accepted it, you know, and we say, like, wouldn't that be cool? But there's like no movements, you know. Crash had bring back the Bandicoot, you know, bring back Bandicoot, and that, you know, didn't go crazy. But like Crash fans, you know, they were always tweeting people, you know, maybe we were annoying to a point. We were tweeting people who had positions of authority in Activision and Sony, being like, hey, you know, what's up with Crash? Do something with Crash. And I think Spyro fans just got to get to that point. Activision's got to look and be like, this is more of an investment, but enough people are clamoring for this that we can test this out. And if it fails, we know not to touch Spyro for a long time. But people need to make their voices heard. This is the point of this video. Spyro fans, like, we need to rally together and like get a clear, concise message and put it out there and say we want something to be done in the vein of the Insomniac Spyro games, you know? And that's not to say every Spyro fan wants that. Maybe some people want stuff like Hero's Tale. Maybe some people like the Legend of Spyro games and want those, you know? Maybe some people like the Skylander stuff and want that to keep going, you know? You gotta speak up for what you want, and you gotta make your voice known. If I was Activision, I'd probably be like, people just don't talk much about Spyro, you know? Like, would they even commit to buying it? It's one thing to say you want something on the internet, it's another to put your money where your mouth is. And for every 10 people that say, oh, I'd buy it, you get maybe a couple people that would buy it, you know? That's just how this stuff works. So, I don't know. I'm just saying, Spyro fans got to speak up. And I think this is the biggest against. We're just too quiet. We got to, like, get together on this and be like, all right, you know, we're serious. We'll buy this. Here's some money. Like, please make this. Please do something with this series we love. We miss it. We want to see it have a bright future. We want more people to become fans of this thing we love and that we're passionate about. And we, you know, we will buy this, you know. And I'm not going to say you should buy the Crash Insane Trilogy if you have no interest in that. But if that's a product that's intriguing you and you're willing to pay the money for that product they are offering, the better that does, the more it'll influence not only Crash's future, but Activision's willingness to look at other things in their portfolio and doing similar things. And hey, Crash is pretty similar to Spyro in their portfolio in terms of a nostalgia ploy sell. So hopefully this all makes sense, and hopefully it's kind of, if you clicked into this wanting a Spyro remake, hopefully what I've said resonated and makes sense to you, and you say, right, yeah, okay, we need to speak up because right now things are quiet, you know. But anyway, that's my thing, you know, things for and against the Spyro remake. My hope is that in, say, 6 months, I can do like a follow-up to this and be like, there's so much more smoke, there's got to be a fire somewhere, and that something's going on with Spyro. And then we can all, everyone can be saying, what's up with Spyro? Why don't they do something with Spyro? What's going on? But as for right now, we need to start speaking up. We need to start letting people know that we love Spyro. We want to see it improved and modernized and carried into the future with new entries that advance what the originals did. So this has been MykonosFan, and this video, it was made possible due to a Patreon goal being met. So I'd like to thank all my patrons for supporting this video, and hopefully this monthly discussion topic will be worth it to all of you. And for all of you who didn't pledge, I hope you found it interesting, and I hope you'll stick around with the channel. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later. This video was generously supported by the following patrons on Patreon. Thank you.